Welcome back to Freedom Friday. Did you know that the Bible refers to ancient Assyria as the land of Nimrod? In Genesis chapter 10, verses 10 to 12, many persons have read this one, we have a description of Nimrod as the world's first great city builder. He began by building Babylon, and then, of course, he moved on to build the cities of Assyria. Centuries later, though, the prophet Micah in chapter 5 and verse 6 of his book calls Assyria the land of Nimrod. He confirms the Genesis record. In these verses, the Bible specifies an African as founder of one of the great centers of power and influence as humans began to live in an organized society on the planet. It is fair to say no other source in all antiquity besides the Bible makes this bold statement before the scriptures. The Old Testament scripture is not shy or hesitant to recognize this Cushite as the first great king after the flood. The Babylonian and Assyrian empires owed their existence, their very existence, to the exploits of this amazing black ruler. Whatever one may think of him, and many have attributed all manner of terrible things to him, some of it downright ridiculous and unfounded, we must all acknowledge him and credit him for founding not one, but two great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Babylon and Assyria. The truth is, black folks were so predominant at that time in Earth's history, it's not surprising that they would be the ones to accomplish this historic feat. In a similar sense, Psalm 105 and verse 23 refers to Egypt, located opposite to Mesopotamia in Africa, as the land of Ham. Ham, of course, is the father of Cush, who was the father of Nimrod, making Nimrod the grandson of Ham. In this way, Bible history points to these great empires of antiquity as founded by descendants of Ham. Africans migrating down the Nile Valley founded the great empires along its banks. The most notable of them, of course, is the Egyptian Empire. Africans migrating eastward along the Tigris and the Euphrates founded what eventually became two of the great empires of Mesopotamia, Babylon and Assyria. Think about that for a moment. The biblical record, written closer to these events than any other authority we can produce, unambiguously identifies the descendants of Ham as the first leaders of human civilization. We should also note that for a long time, most of what was known about Assyria and Babylon was first spoken of in the Bible long before archaeological research confirmed them. Consequently, when the Bible states that black folks founded these empires, we should take it seriously. Of course, we have noted on Freedom Friday before that has not prevented Europeans from claiming this honor for themselves, Because they dominated the means of communication and the instruments of education for the last 1,000 years, their claims have dominated everybody else's and have taken on the form of truth. And then there is the historical reality that during the 19th century, when European colonization and exploitation was at its peak, not only were the colonizers exploiting the oppressed people and their natural resources, they were also busy stealing historical artifacts throughout Africa and the ancient Near East. In searching for these artifacts, do you know where they looked first? They were largely guided by the biblical record. All of the great museums of Europe and later the United States are stuffed with these so-called discoveries. European experts and scholars were also the ones interpreting and writing about them. So they took full advantage of the opportunity to interpret what they found in a way to support a Eurocentric account while minimizing, distorting, ignoring, and sometimes even destroying evidence that contradicted their interpretations. The effect of this dominance on the rest of us is that what we thought we knew about ourselves as Black folks was largely based on what we read from these works. African descended people are among the most religious people in the world. For example, in the United States, over 90% of African Americans still say they are religious and spiritual. And I venture to say this is probably the same worldwide. Yet most of our religious instructions, like our educational experiences, have been from European sources, which have many of these false claims already embedded in them. But let's get back to Egypt and Mesopotamia. The question we must ask is, do we have the historical support for the biblical declaration of the Black origins of these civilizations? We do. One of the most widely known and respected European historians of the 19th century was George Rawlinson. In his book, Ancient History, which he published in 1900, he lists Nimrod as the first Chaldean monarch, and he describes the Chaldeans as the builders of the Tower of Babel. We'll say much about the Chaldeans. We'll visit them in our next episode. Suffice it to say right now that the biblical declaration concerning the African origins of early civilizations has long been recognized as authentic. Rawlinson also wrote in his book, Seven Monarchies of the Ancient Eastern World, Volume 1, page 34, he wrote, "It is the simplest and best interpretation of this passage to understand it as asserting that the four races, the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites, were ethnically connected, being all descended from Ham. And further, that the primitive people of Babylon were a subdivision of these races, namely the Cushites or Ethiopians, connected in some degree to the Canaanites, Egyptians, and Libyans, but still more closely with the people which dwelt anciently upon the Upper Nile." So, in this perceptive statement, historically accurate, Rawlinson clearly links Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan as descendants of Ham, which is consistent with the biblical record. In modern times, the greatest historian, African historian, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, his scholarly efforts has done more to confound many naysayers than anyone else. And Dr. Diop writes, "The civilizations attributed to them, Indo-Europeans, are inevitably located in the heart of Negro countries in the southern part of the northern hemisphere: Egypt, Arabia, Phoenicia, Mesopotamia, Elam, and India. If we refer to the most remote antiquity," he wrote, "the evidence forces us to start from the Black countries to explain all the phenomena of civilization." Unfortunately, from the moment Europeans began to understand the implications of their discoveries in Egypt and the ancient world, the effort to reinterpret the data in their favor began. It reached its peak during the enslavement of Africans in the Western Hemisphere, when the whole history of Black Africa, they tied the whole history of Black Africa to slavery. The curse of Ham, for example, was a central tool to retell the story of Africans as the story of slaves. Born into slavery we were, and destined to remain in slavery. Dr. Diop, or Dr. Diop, I'm always mixing up the pronunciation of his name, but he explains the cumulative effects of Black folks listening to that false narrative from European history. And he describes it this way. There's a fairly long quotation here. Bear with me as we run through it, because I think it's really, really critical. He says, the memory of the recent slavery to which the Black race has been subjected, cleverly kept alive in men's minds, and especially in Black minds, often affects Black consciousness negatively. From that recent slavery, an attempt has been made to construct, despite all historical truth, a legend that the Black has always been reduced to slavery by the superior white race with which he has lived, wherever it may have been. This enables whites easily to justify the presence of the Negro in Egypt or in Mesopotamia or Arabia, decreeing that they were enslaved in those countries, you see. Although such an affirmation is nothing but dogma designed to falsify history, those who advance it are fully aware that it is erroneous. It nonetheless contributes to alienating Black consciousness. Throughout these transformations in the Negro relations with the rest of the world, it became increasingly difficult each day, and even inadmissible, for those unaware of their past glory and for Black people themselves to believe that they could have originated the first civilization which flowered on earth, a civilization to which humanity owes much or most of its progress. The biblical record is essential in setting the record straight. Biblical history and theology, so long a tool for maintaining white supremacy, can now be the cornerstone for reigniting Black consciousness, especially among people of faith, those who believe the Bible, those who trust in it, those who make it their guide of life. The Bible makes it abundantly clear. The foundation civilizations began with the descendants of Ham. They formed the greater part of the biblical world, and the biblical history can never, should never be told without them. God used them in a variety of ways to preserve and carry forward the redemption story. They were at the forefront of building the first civilizations. They formed part of the chosen people, and they gave the world all it needed to facilitate the onward march of history. For African descended people who understand themselves as the foundation of civilization, this awareness is not a claim of superiority, but a recovery of true history, an affirmation of humanity's earliest intellectual, spiritual, and cultural achievements rooted in Africa. And with that knowledge, we can now create a new vision of ourselves as restorers of the breach. Thank you for joining me on this week's Freedom Friday. Please remember to hit the subscribe button in YouTube, share it with others. Until next time then, stay conscious and stay free. This is Freedom Friday, where we tell the whole story.